he's going to be talking to us about a prospective grading system for donation discussions.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for joining us here on a beautiful day outside. So yes, we're talking about grading family donation conversations. This is a concept that I've been able to start putting in play in some of the quality improvement that we do into our donation conversations in Victoria. I'd very much like to acknowledge the assistance of my colleagues both at the Austin and the Organ Tissue Authority, as well as Michael Bailey from the ANZAC RC. My declarations I've taken to declaring in all donation conversations that I am in fact a registered donor, and I'd also like to declare that we've received some funding support for our statistician, so thank you. So background about family donation conversations. Well, really the possibility that you need to discuss with families is a very real occasion for intensive care clinicians, and it brings together death and dying, it brings together individual wishes, it brings together family dynamics and family wishes. And we know from previous Organ and Tissue Authority data that the family raised is a really strong predictor, but nowhere near as strong as being a registered donor. So these are both very positively associated with donation consent rates. But not all conversations are created equal. I'm across the road, in fact across the river from the home ground for my chosen football team, so they're going to feature in my poor analogies. Essentially, some conversations are not straightforward. The outcome is not clear. You need to have a specific set of skills, you need to have timing, and you need to have teamwork. The sporting analogy for these conversations might be that it's a hardball get or a contested mark. So some conversations are not straightforward, or at least not predictably straightforward. Some are predictably straightforward. The ball comes straight to you. The result's largely predetermined before you go into the conversation. You still need to have skill and teamwork. You still need to have the right people in the right place. And you need to make sure you don't stuff it up with an unforced error. It's all possible. So we know from the literature that there is strong prediction, as I've already quoted the Australian literature, but also here our Canadian colleagues, that really there are strong evidence that when the family are bringing this up, that they're positively associated with it. What we don't have is a grading system that makes it easy for the clinician to work out who should I be getting involved in this conversation, and I'd like to try and propose a structure for that. So what would a great grading system look like? Well, it would measure the influence of the interventions that we bring into play, whether that be training or staffing. It would be helpful in guiding the type of staff that we use. It would be helpful in guiding the type of training that we prescribe for them. And it might then lead to research. As I've said, if they're not all created equal, we've got to make sure we're comparing apples to apples. So the properties of an ideal grading system, if you're going to use it in the heat of battle, so to speak, as a clinician, it needs to be simple, it needs to be quick and easy to apply. You need to be able to do it before you go into the conversation, not retrospectively. And you need to clearly identify very different groups of people, and it needs to be associated with different outcomes. And in this case, our outcome is consent. So I propose to you a pretty simple construct using two major variables. That is, are they registered on the organ donor registry, and did the family raise it? So if you've got both of those, you're a grade 1, or as I've been describing with some of my donation colleagues, the unicorn. These are precious and shouldn't be let go. Then acknowledging the powerful determinant of AODR status, the second grade is when the family haven't raised it, but they are registered. Third grade is when it's family raised but without registration. And then the cold call at the bottom, when neither the person is registered nor have it been brought up by the family, but it has to be cold call raised by the staff. Those are the grade 4s. So, the aims and objectives of this analysis, really I want to demonstrate the utility of a simple 4-level grading system. I want to demonstrate that there's a difference in the observed consent rate in at least one grade, so that we can find one interesting grade. And I want to test the hypothesis that training effect would be clearly apparent in the grade with the lowest consent rate. So what did we do? I gratefully acknowledge the permission and support from my colleagues in the Clinical Governance Committee of the Organ and Tissue Authority, who offered permission for me to assess rather limited data. We've got to be careful about the limited data because there are various different jurisdictions involved and they've got different privacy legislation. So the data we've got doesn't really identify individual patients, nor individual hospitals, nor even individual states or territories. and it was a retrospective review of all of the 2017 data from the Donate Life audit. For those that aren't aware, the Donate Life audit is collected in Donate Life hospitals. There's 75 of them nationwide, and it represents at least 98% of all donation activity. In fact, donation conversations. It represents all of the donation activity. And it's completed by donation specialist nurses. We looked at the registration status, we looked at the donation, was it raised by family, yes or no? We looked at consent rates, and we looked at the level of training. We also identified were they in a specialist donation position. So in terms of the training definitions that I wish to apply, really we've broken it down into 3 levels of training or experience. So Tier 1 were those that have got no formal FDC training. That doesn't mean they don't have experience and years of experience potentially in speaking to families, but this includes staff who haven't undertaken the Organ and Tissue Authority's Family Donation Conversation 2-day workshop. As you can imagine, Tier 2 is those that have undertaken that workshop, and it could include any number of staff. Notably, it's been compulsory since 2014. Curriculum has been brought in the college for this for specialists to undertake this FDC training. And then the last tier is donation specialists. So at a minimum, they've done the FDC core workshop. They've almost certainly done or should be doing a 1-day practical workshop as well, and they operate in a defined role as donation specialists. So what were our results? A little hard there to read on that slide, but essentially 23% of patients 24% were registered on the AODR. It's a bit low in terms of those that were checked, and the vast majority were not registered, or were registered no, or were not checked. We're not able to separate out that data from the data that was released. In terms of family raising it, the 2 small ones there that aren't projecting, essentially the big one is it was staff raised in 77% of the time, 22% of the time it was raised by families, and the 2 very small groups, the smallest of 6 cases where it was unclear who raised it, and then 13 cases was a preemptive decline. That's less than 1% of the entire population where family have raised it preemptively to decline. So if we look at consent overall, the consent rate overall in Australia is 58%. As we hear in the media, it needs to be better. So if we look at the donation conversations by grade, we can see that there is a marked difference. Grade 1, 2 and 3 all have high consent rates, and grade 4 is very different. In fact, in grade 1, the unicorns, it's really ours to lose. 95% observed consent rate, and in grade 4 at 41% consent rate, so less than 50%. However, these grade 4s make up the vast majority of the population studied. There it is shown graphically, and you can see that there's a great big drop-off in consent in that final tier. So in terms of tier of training, if we look at the distribution, we can see that training was distributed across the different tiers. So those are the 3 tiers of training across the different grades. Notably, there's a good number of donation specialists making into the tough, more common grade 4 conversations, but also disproportionately more donation specialists, interestingly, making it into the grade 2. And I can't quite explain why that difference might be, but they seem to be overrepresented there. So a busy slide, but I'll take it through step by step. We can see in grade 1 that there are very high consent rates. We can see in grade 4 that the consent rates are lower, but there is a substantial difference between the different tiers of training in these grade 4 conversations. So from 32% up to 53%. The differential, however, between those that have done the 2-day workshop isn't particularly high. So from 32.8 to 33. How does that look in terms of statistically? What are the chances of this occurring by chance? Well, really, it's all about looking at tier 4, where it's highly significant. And we look here at if you've done your 2-day workshop, it really doesn't make any difference. Your odds ratio is not greatly different. If we're looking at those that are donation specialists over the untrained, yes, there is a marked difference in odds ratio there, but also there's a marked difference between donation specialists and those that have completed the workshop in this grade 4 grouping. So in conclusion, I'd like to conclude that a grading system using 2 easily identified variables makes it possible to identify before you go in the conversations that are likely to be associated with a high consent rate. Registration and family raised, whether you do it individually or combined, are strong predictors of consent, and the hypothesis that training effect would be demonstrated in the grade with the lowest consent rate is supported. Level of training of the requester has absolutely minimal influence on consent rates when either or both of registration or family raised are present. Tough conversations are the most common, and experts appear to do better in tough conversations. Thank you. Hello, Lucy.
Thank you. I am curious about your outcome measure of consent rates and the disconnect between that as the stated outcome of the conversation, as opposed to perhaps the philosophy that I understood the workshop proposed, which was that you were helping the family to make an enduring decision that was consistent with their, long-held values about organ donation. And following on from that, I would have thought that some families who say no, yet have a well-conducted conversation, should also be regarded as a success.
I totally agree. This audit doesn't really capture and measure a successful, lasting, binding decision for families. Consent rate shouldn't be 100% and it shouldn't be 0%. It should be as close as possible to what the community on a warm, sunny day says they would like. We can't create warm, sunny days. We've got a grieving situation, but it would be great to have a minimum amount of artefact, that is hospital artefact, ICU artefact, or requester artefact, getting between the stated population support for donation, which is around the 70 to 80% mark, and our observed consent rate. So when we say that there is a difference of 58%, which is the overall consent to what Australia then goes on and says they would like in that 70 to 80% range, there's got to be some artefact there. We see in particular populations where the family and registration is super high, that's probably real for them. It represents the real end value. But what we want is not to have too high. If we were getting 95% in every one of these tiers, I would worry that there is either a very unusual population of people being requested or a very unusual population of requestors, both of which should be looked at.
Thanks, Sam. I want to take not agree particularly with your conclusion, because what you found is something that I've seen similarly in New South Wales. So it seemed to me that training made no difference to outcome in grade 4 in the grade 4 conversations. The only group that made a difference were people who were working in donation specialist roles. Do you have an explanation for that? Is the training a complete waste of time, therefore?
I thought someone might ask that and I prepared a slide on it. But essentially the answer is no, training is not a complete waste of time. We do training for multiple reasons, not just the how to do it. You don't go and do a 2-day ECMO course and call yourself an ECMO expert. You do it for awareness of the process. The same is true of the donation conversation. No one from OTA here? Maybe it could be a 1-day course, not a 2-day course. Maybe you need process overview, not a stepwise how to do it. Maybe once you're appointed to a role, then you need an exhaustive step through how to do it.
I think we've probably got time for one question, so Jeff.
Thanks.
I didn't want to hog the microphone. It really follows on from Michael's question. I'm really thinking about all the confounders that are evident with the donation specialist. You've got particular hospitals that have access to them. You've possibly got selection bias. It doesn't apply to New Zealand because we don't have donation specialists as such. And I'm just rattling through in my head. Is it really just a systems organisational type of reason rather than the individual? And also, what extra support does a donation specialist have? Because they're a very important person. They bring along extra help to talk to the families, etc., rather than just somebody who sits in front of the family and conducts a conversation.
What I wonder, and this really needs further work to work out, is it more about their separateness and their identity and being introduced as a separate entity, as a co-team member that defines how families relate to them rather than the conversational skills or construct that they put together. What would be fascinating to tease out, and we've got the beginnings of the data, I haven't been able to present it today, is there a difference between medical specialists and nursing specialists? Our anecdotal experience in Victoria would suggest that there is a considerable positive influence seen with nurse donation specialists engaging in the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Sam.